Hello everybody, my name is James Davies and welcome to Photo Chat Vlog on YouTube. Now this is part 2 of some thoughts and recollections about this photograph that I took of a woman at the Seljalandsfoss waterfall in Iceland. Part 1 dealt with some of the technicalities of the photo and my trip to Iceland. This part is a bit more of a ramble around other things that happened whilst I was at the waterfall and how they went on to affect me for quite a while after I got home from the trip. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, well, do catch up on that. But I need to warn you now that this part 2 video gets a bit gross in places with tales of being ill. So if you are not into that sort of thing and aren't a fan of doom and gloom, you should probably skip this one, and I won't mind if you do. There will be a second warning further in, but I'm going to proceed because, gross though it is, I'm interested myself in how the photo is all tied up with what happened afterwards. So as I mentioned, we were on our guided tour, and we were wrapped up warm and walking around the waterfall, and I was trying to be careful. We did our walk all around the waterfall, and I was standing with one of my mates while we were waiting for everybody else in our group to finish taking their pictures and have their waterfall moment. And I was just walking towards a gate when I lost my footing and I slipped on the ice. And I slipped straight backwards and landed on my back. A really hard slam on the ice. Now when you slip on the ice, it's really hard to get back up because the thing that made you fall down is all around you. So you tend to feel a bit self-conscious, and somehow I got back up. And my mate helped me, and I recall mostly being wet. It was quite a shock because I wasn't expecting it to happen. And I don't fall over much these days, to be honest, so that's always a shock anyway. But I did whack myself really hard on my back, and as I dusted myself off, I checked to see if anything was broken, and it didn't appear to be. So all I was left with was feeling a bit damp and shook up. And, well, falling over is all part of the story when you're on holiday, isn't it? Well, it certainly was, because we carried on the rest of our holiday, and it actually turned out really great. It was a really cool trip, but on the way home, at some point on the long trip of a 4-hour plane flight, a 2-hour bus ride, a train journey, and then a taxi, and I think I know exactly when, I picked up the norovirus. Now, right now, I'm sure everybody's had enough of hearing about a particular virus, but the norovirus is a stomach bug, and I started to feel ill when I was waiting to catch the train back to where I live. Now, I felt really, really ill. I felt like I wanted to be sick. Norovirus, as I said, is a stomach bug, and it can affect you in 2 ways. And all I'm going to say is it affected me solely in the northern way. So basically, I wanted to vomit, which I'll admit is not very nice either to hear me talking about or to experience it. So you can more or less quit this video now if you don't want to hear any more about norovirus. Do feel free, and I won't be offended. But there is a story behind all of this. So, literally, I got into my house and I thought, I feel really, really unwell. And I went to take a couple of painkillers, and within seconds my body just said, I don't think so. We're home now and we need to be sick. And I proceeded to be very, very ill every hour for about the next 12 hours. So I managed to be sick at first in my bathroom down the loo, and that made me feel a tiny little bit better, but only better enough to know what the next day or 2 was going to be like. And so I got a bucket and a towel, and I just went straight to bed. Now the routine of a serious stomach bug is that you feel ill, and you vomit, and you feel marginally better, and you try and sleep, and then you're woken up by the need to be sick again, and that moment happens, and it's horrible, but at least then you can go back to sleep, and obviously your body is wanting to get whatever it is that's making you feel ill expelled from inside you, to make sure it's not there anymore. So apart from the misery of actually being sick, the problem was that after a couple of hours, although there was nothing left in my body, every sip of water I drank eventually had to be expelled again. And my body was very, very certain that everything had to come out. And it was really making me be sick, very, very violently. I woke up on maybe the 2nd or 3rd hour of misery, and after the very violent vomiting routine was done, I realised I had also probably broken my ribs. because I was not only in so much pain from being bent double by myself trying to expel this awful bug from my body, but I had the most atrocious pain in my right-hand side around the back of my lungs. And I knew that that fall in Iceland at the waterfall must have caused me to crack my ribs, and then my body twisting myself backwards and forwards to be sick had actually broken them. So the next few days were just awful, because I was stuck at home, and I was too ill to go out to the shop, and I was too sick to move, and I could hardly even move around my bed and get comfortable with the terrible pain in my ribs. And my sister got in touch with the doctors, and they rang me and were like, "You've probably got the norovirus, don't come anywhere near us." And they also said, "You need to get painkillers and you need to get some kind of replenishing fluid in you." And I was like, "I can't. I'm too ill to move." And they said, "We'll get somebody else to do it for you then." And luckily, my brother-in-law most nobly made the trip, and he left all the bits I needed outside my house. But the next couple of days were just awful, because even when I'd stopped being sick, I was in great pain from broken ribs, and I was in great pain from dehydration, and then massive misery from having an awful virus. So, back in the land of photography, I can't really look at this picture without remembering that falling over moment, and everything that came afterwards. This picture is the view from behind the waterfall, and if you look, it's actually down there near that bridge where I actually slipped. And I didn't know at the time when I took this photograph that in just a few minutes I would have walked round down to the path and would have this life-changing moment, which at least changed my life for quite a few moments. But the story isn't over with the norovirus, and neither is the falling over, because at the time this photo was taken, which was late February 2017, the UK was also stricken with very strong gale force winds. And I remember getting home and getting out of the taxi at my house and noticing that all of the bins where I put my rubbish outside were knocked over on the floor. And I just thought, I'm not feeling very well, so I'm going straight inside. But what happened while we were away was that the bins had all been blown over by gale-force winds called Storm Doris. Now, the reality of norovirus is once it's out of your system, if you're a healthy person, you just get better pretty quick. So I got home from Iceland on a Sunday night, and I was stricken in bed until about Thursday, when I started to feel a bit better. And I think it was Friday when I looked out of the window, and I was in my kitchen, and I looked out and I thought, the view looks really different. What's going on? And it was on Saturday that I was well enough to go out of the house, and I went down to the end of the garden, and lo and behold, talk about falling down, my fence had blown down in the storm. Now this is the fence that separates me from the people that live at the end of my garden, and it's my fence. I own it, and I am responsible for it. Now, it was old. It was something I was going to have to replace at some point anyway, and the lady from the end of the garden spotted me, and we had a chat, and she was like, "Are you going to fix this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know. Let me get on to do it." And I arranged all of that. So a fencing guy was going to come and fix it the week after, which was great. But the deal was that I had to clear the whole fence area and get rid of the old one, and make it all so that they could just come back in and bish bash bosh get the fence put up. So I ordered what we call a skip, like a dumpster. And I got my cousin, who's handy for these kind of things, to come over, and we planned to spend the following Saturday taking down the old fence and clearing everything up. And that day, I was just in my bathroom getting ready to start, and I was spraying some deodorant, and it made me want to sneeze. And I sneezed, and I screamed, because I broke my ribs again. Something went horribly cracky in the same place in my back, and suddenly I couldn't move. And this was not cool, because we hadn't even cleared up one stick of the fence, and I was in serious pain. Now the long story, as if all of this wasn't long enough, was that one of my brothers nobly came round and he helped my cousin dismantle the fence, and I did what I could with my limited movement. But if you've ever had broken ribs, well, you can't really move very well at all. I eventually got over it, and they healed, but round about that time my bed was not a happy place. Because not only was it where I spent 4 days of norovirus sickness, but I also then spent another few weeks of trying to sleep comfortably. When you break your ribs, you just can't do normal life stuff, and I couldn't drive, for example, which I rely on. So there is just so much misery, and whilst I love this photograph, I don't really love the story of what happened afterwards. Now I can click on other photographs from this trip, and they don't have quite the same story that this one has. So this one of us on the next stop, which is basically the next photo that I took, It just reminds me of walking up to see a glacier, because that's what we were doing. It doesn't lead me on to a great long story about breaking my ribs. But this picture, in terms of memory and in terms of a moment in time, this picture has a long tail. It's even longer, in fact, because, and I will be brief about this, but I remember it snowed about a year later where I live, and I can remember going to try and walk into town to see what it was like downtown. And I got down to a slippery patch, and my body, my actual ribs, kind of called out in a little voice, saying, "Do you remember what happened in Iceland? Don't go any further." And that was actually one of the first times my body actually said something to me. And I definitely turned around, feeling a little bit scared, and I paid attention, and I went home. I have managed not to break my ribs since, or catch the norovirus, or, in fact, at the moment, any other kind of fashionable virus. So there you have it. One photograph, multiple social media implications, and a very long story, resulting in a lot of misery. This is probably the last Photo Chat vlog for 2020, which, let's face it, has not been a great year. But I did get some other videos started, and I will try and get them finished in due course. In the meantime, I hope you're okay, and you have had a reasonable 2020, and have managed to take some photographs or just stayed safe and healthy. This year, of all the years, has showed us that you just never know. So until I next get making a video, enjoy your photography, make the best of what we've got at the moment, and remember that if you can't travel at the moment, sometimes where you are is where it's at.